and why does all of this matter?
Or help.
How to make whatever money you've got go that little bit further.
Or just a bit of an escape. They're all looking for the same things. Visit bbc.co.uk for cost of living tips and advice.
The BBC News at 6 o'clock with Sophie Rayworth.
At 6, the Home Secretary says Britain's biggest force, the Metropolitan Police, faces a long road to recovery after a highly scathing review. The report found institutional racism, misogyny and homophobia in the Met. A woman who discovered that pictures of her murdered daughters have been shared by officers says she feels vindicated but angry.
They're the people you call when all else fails. And if we can't trust them to do their job properly, that's a very, very scary thought.
We'll be looking at the details of the report on what the Mayor of London calls one of the Met's darkest days. Also on the programme. Boris Johnson admits misleading MPs over lockdown parties, but says he didn't do it intentionally or recklessly. Why the Hollywood actress Gwyneth Paltrow is in court today over a skiing accident 7 years ago. And the plans to turn Highland water into power in the biggest hydroelectric project in the UK for 40 years.
On BBC London, the Commissioner of the Met Police vows to change as the damning report finds failings within the force. We'll have reaction from across the capital.
Good evening and welcome to the BBC News at 6. The head of the Metropolitan Police, Sir Mark Rowley, has apologised and accepted his force has let people down after a scathing report by Baroness Casey found it to be institutionally racist, homophobic and misogynistic. The review says Britain's largest police force needs a complete overhaul to restore public trust. It was commissioned after the rape and murder of Sarah Everard by a serving Met police officer. It found that female officers and staff routinely face sexism and misogyny. Baroness Casey described a deep-seated homophobia within the Met, with claims of racism and discrimination not recognised or taken seriously. Our first report tonight is from our special correspondent, Lucy Manning.
Let's remember how all this began. Sarah Everard, walking home, kidnapped, raped and murdered by a Met police officer. It shocked then, and this report is frightening. A force that is broken, failing.
There is, without doubt, a discriminatory culture right across the Metropolitan Police, and I think that institutional racism, institutional sexism, institutional misogyny and homophobia are definitely present across the organisation. We think the Met is not able to assure all of us that its officers are of sufficient integrity and standards to be serving police officers, so it needs to clean itself up.
The Met has lost the consent to police, the report believes. It can't protect its own staff and it can't provide adequate policing for the victims of crime. For too long there's been a culture of denial about the scale of its problems.
The details set out in this report of a broken force are frankly horrific. Rape evidence that had to be discarded because the fridges in police stations didn't work. A Sikh officer who had his beard cut by colleagues. A Muslim officer who found bacon in his boots. And female officers routinely targeted and humiliated by their male counterparts.
The voices in the report are bleak.
You have to try and be invisible as a black woman. If you complain, you get a reputation as being trouble.
There is a culture of hit lists, targets, and trying to sleep with female officers and staff.
I don't trust my own organisation. I will vary the route I walk to avoid walking past police officers when I'm not at work.
Cousins and Carrick, the Met's murderer and rapist. Baroness Casey clear those who have the power to arrest need to have the trust of those they police, so this needs to be a landmark moment. The Commissioner of the Met apologetic, but not accepting every word of the report.
It's disturbing, it's upsetting, it's heartbreaking. I apologise to those who've suffered as a consequence.
Do you accept Baroness Casey's findings that the force is institutionally racist, institutionally misogynistic and institutionally homophobic?
I accept her diagnosis about the racism, misogyny and homophobia in the organisation, and also that we have these systemic failings, management failings and cultural failings. I understand her use of the term institutional. It's not a term I use myself.
It's nearly a quarter of a century since the Met was labelled institutionally racist after the murder of Stephen Lawrence. In a statement, his mother, Baroness Lawrence, said, "It is rotten to the core. Any reluctance or refusal to accept that institutional racism exists within the police service will mean that any attempt at change is doomed to failure." Shabnam Chowdhury was a detective superintendent in the Met and lived through some of the racism the review highlights.
There was a particular officer who, whenever I was out of the room, referred to me as the P, with the P word.
She believes the Met must change from the top to the bottom.
My message to Sir Mark Rowley is ensure that leadership is supported at every level, ensure that those who want to whistleblow can speak out so that you can root out the dirty, rotten apples that sit within your organisation that have a huge, detrimental impact on trust and confidence.
When Met officers took photos of the dead bodies of murdered sisters Nicole Smallman and Bieber Henry and shared them with colleagues, it's long been obvious to others that the Met is dysfunctional.
I felt vindicated, and it doesn't bring me pleasure because they're the people you call when all else fails. And if we can't trust them to do their job properly, that's a very, very scary thought.
When a robbery victim is sent inappropriate messages by the detective investigating and he keeps his job, it's long been obvious the police can't police themselves.
There have been reports in the past and nothing's changed, so I think a lot of people that I know are thinking, well, what makes this any different? Who's going to measure those steps to be taken? What's going to be the repercussions if this doesn't happen?
Reports have come, commissioners have gone, and still the Met hasn't changed. The warning is, this is its last chance. For too long it has failed too many, the very people who need protecting, including those just walking home. Lucy Manning, BBC News.
Well, Sir Mark Rowley, newly appointed as the Met's Police Commissioner, says he is already working to improve standards. But how do you turn around a police force facing such damning criticism? Our Home Editor, Mark Easton, reports.
The Met has become disconnected from Londoners. Their consent can no longer be assumed. A damning conclusion from today's report that should ring alarm bells among politicians and senior police officers across the country. In Britain, we have what's called policing by consent, the idea that officers serve as members of the public in uniform and exercise powers with the approval of the people that they serve. But that relies on trust, and in London that has fallen significantly. 89% of Londoners trusted the Met back in 2016. That dropped to a low of 66% a year ago. The most recent figure is 71%, and the expectation must be that today's report will see trust plummet still further.
Why should I trust them? Why?
Do you think they can change?
No, because most of them, the thief, the liar, the rapists, the abusers, everything you can think of.
I like to hope they're not all like that, but at the end of the day, they're the people protecting us, so it's not good to hear that.
I've got friends that want to join the police, you know, but because of the racism and all, it put them off.
In the short term, today's report's actually going to make it harder for the Met to do what Louise Casey recommends, to recruit many more women, people from ethnic minorities and the LGBTQ+ community. Police morale will also be damaged by the review's ferocious criticism. And it's not just in London. Police forces across England and Wales are vetting all their officers, and every misconduct hearing, every court case may further undermine public confidence. 6 forces, of course, have already been put in special measures by inspectors. So will the politicians give the Met Commissioner, Sir Mark Rowley, the time he says he needs to turn things around?
Home Secretary.
The report recommends reviewing progress after 2 and 5 years, but in the immediate future, the problems are likely to worsen.
I will be holding the Metropolitan Police and the Mayor of London to account by measuring their progress. I ask Londoners to judge Sir Mark and the Mayor of London not on their words, but on their actions to stamp out racist, misogynistic and homophobic behaviour.
The Home Secretary has backed the Met Commissioner to get the job done.
I have every confidence that Sir Mark Rowley and his team will deliver that for them.
Keir Starmer, the leader of the Labour Party.
But with a general election probably next year and manifestos to be written before that, will party leaders demand radical reform of policing sooner?
Page after page, the report provides both a detailed diagnosis of what's gone wrong and a blueprint for radical reform. The strength of its findings require an immediate and urgent response.
Today marks a huge moment for policing in London and across the country. There will be more dark days before improvements are visible. For traditional British policing, the warning lights are flashing. Mark Easton, BBC News.
Well, let's talk now to our special correspondent Lucy Manning. What now for the Met?
Change or be dismantled? I mean, what can you say about this report? If you read it, do you get angry because of the deep-seated discrimination? Do you get sad because of the terrible, distressing details, or exasperated because the Met knew most of this? Actually, the Met knew all of this, and it was in denial. Having reported on the disappearance of Sarah Everard and the conviction of Wayne Couzens, and abuse by Met officers, I think none of us who read this report could think of anything that came close to be as damning about a British institution, and that is an institution that we all turn to when we need help. I think Baroness Casey probably put it best. She said bluntly, it cannot be our job as the public to protect ourselves from the police. So how many times can the Met say sorry? The time for apologies is over. The Met and policing as a whole now has nowhere to hide.
Lucy, thank you. Boris Johnson has accepted that he misled Parliament over so-called Partygate, but insists he did not do it intentionally or recklessly. He made the admission in evidence given to MPs who are investigating whether he lied to Parliament about lockdown parties. Tomorrow, the group of MPs will question the former Prime Minister during a televised appearance in Parliament. Our political editor, Chris Mason, reports.
He might be the Prime Minister before last, but Boris Johnson still commands attention and still has questions to answer.
Are you confident your evidence will clear you, Mr Johnson? Do you think you'll be vindicated?
Today, he had a first crack at answering them. What's being looked into now isn't about whether he broke the law. We know he did that at this event on his birthday in the Cabinet Room. It isn't even about whether these gatherings, the subject of inquiries already, broke the rules or the guidance. It's about whether moments like this in the House of Commons were misleading.
I'm sure that in whatever happened, the guidance was followed and the rules were followed at all times.
Before he turns up to face questions from a committee of MPs tomorrow, we've seen today 4 main themes to his defence. He accepts that the House of Commons was misled in some instances, but adds, when the statements were made, they were made in good faith and on the basis of what I honestly knew and believed at the time. I did not intentionally or recklessly mislead the House. There's a dollop of blame for the advice he got or didn't get. Mr Johnson says there is not a single document that indicated that I received any warning or advice that any event broke or may have broken the rules or guidance. He adds that it was self-evidently reasonable for me to rely on assurances that I received from my advisers. The committee alleges that it ought to have been obvious to him that the rules or guidance wasn't followed. He replies, if it was obvious to me, then it would have been obvious to the dozens of others who also attended. Mr Johnson also criticises the committee. It is important to record my disappointment at the highly partisan tone and content.
Here we are again with Boris Johnson making himself the centre of the story. And I think after all of his lies, scandals and failures, the British public just want to see an end to this soap opera.
You're a friend of Boris Johnson. Does this get him off the hook?
What it shows categorically is that it's not a single shred of evidence that Boris knowingly misled Parliament. What's more, when it's shown that inadvertently there had been some inaccuracies, he corrected the record.
Tomorrow, it won't be Boris Johnson's friends doing the talking, it will be him, in front of MPs, in front of the cameras. His character and political future on trial. Now, I hazard a guess, watching at home, that you have a view about Boris Johnson, good or bad, probably not indifferent. For the MPs who will scrutinise his answers tomorrow, they have to decide whether the incidences where he misled Parliament amounted to doing so inadvertently, recklessly or intentionally. They'll then write up a report, potentially suggest some sort of sanction. That could include him being suspended from the House of Commons, and then all MPs across the House will get to vote on that sanction. It could potentially lead eventually to a by-election where his constituents in West London get to decide whether or not he carries on as an MP. But that is several steps down the track. But for all MPs, and Conservative MPs in particular, tonight they do have to weigh up a possibility down the track. The possibility that at some point they may get to decide whether to finish off Boris Johnson or not.
Chris, thank you. And there will, of course, be full coverage of Boris Johnson's appearance at the Privileges Committee across the BBC from 2 o'clock tomorrow afternoon. Now, talks have been taking place between President Putin and China's president in what is Xi Jinping's first trip to Moscow since Russia's invasion of Ukraine a year ago. The two leaders have been setting out their plans to boost cooperation between the two countries as their rift with the West grows. Well, our Russia editor Steve Rosenberg joins us now from Moscow. And have the talks brought peace in Ukraine any closer?
Short answer, no. Long answer, no, and there's no surprise about that. There is no detailed Chinese peace plan. What there is a set of principles that China's put on the table to try to end the war, but they've been met with a lot of scepticism in the West and in Ukraine. Now, today, Vladimir Putin claimed that neither Kiev nor the West were interested in pursuing peace. The reality is there is no sign that he is about to pull his troops out of Ukraine. Then he turned to Britain, and the news that the UK is to supply Ukraine with ammunition containing depleted uranium. He issued a warning to the UK. He said that if this happens, Russia will be forced to react, since the collective West was starting to use weapons with a nuclear component. But key point, this is not a nuclear weapon. The UK has been using this kind of ammunition for decades, but you can expect, I think, from now on, the Kremlin to use this to try to fit its narrative that somehow the West is out to destroy Russia.
Steve Rosenberg in Moscow, thank you. A man was set alight last night as he walked home from a mosque in Birmingham. West Midlands police say he suffered facial burns after his jacket was set on fire in Edgbaston. A man has been arrested on suspicion of attempted murder, with counter-terrorism police involved in the investigation. Our Midlands correspondent Phil Mackey is there for us now. Phil.
Yes, Sophie, it's been a traumatic 24 hours for this community. People really concerned for their safety after this horrific attack on a man much loved and respected by people who live here and his family, who were also in the area. All of them asking tonight just exactly why did this attack happen. Walking home from prayers last night, the man was minutes from home when he was approached by another man. There was an altercation and he was set alight. The man was attacked just down there. There were still scorch marks on the pavement. Neighbours managed to put the flames out. Then they brought him up here and took him to his family home.
I heard a lot of commotion, so I came out to look, and all I could see was a fire engine, an ambulance, police. It's not a nice feeling, is it? Because I live on my own. I live here. It could have been me at the end of the day.
On the eve of Ramadan, the attack has shocked the area.
All through the night last night and this morning, they've all been checking their CCTV, Ring doorbells, and have been able to track the whole location that this man went throughout the ward, which has been phenomenal.
This afternoon there was an arrest just around the corner, a man taken into custody on suspicion of murder, and questions about whether this attack could be linked to another in Ealing, when an 82-year-old man was set alight on his way home from prayers a few weeks ago.
I've had meetings today with colleagues from the Metropolitan Police, and they're engaged in the inquiry. So yeah, we're working very much closely together on it.
Police have promised extra patrols and have urged people not to speculate about why the attack happened. Phil Mackey, BBC News, Birmingham.
Time is almost 6:20. Our top story this evening. A damning report finds Britain's biggest police force, the Met, to be institutionally racist, homophobic and misogynistic, and says it needs a complete overhaul to restore public trust. And the actress Gwyneth Paltrow appears in court over claims she crashed into a man while skiing out of control.
And on BBC London, what next for the Met Police Service? A damning report into its failings suggests it could be broken up if it fails to change quickly enough.
A huge amount of the world's electricity is generated by hydropower, essentially the power of water. Now the energy giant SSE is announcing £100 million of funding for a giant project in the Highlands, which will be the UK's biggest hydro scheme in 40 years. If it goes ahead, SSE says it will help tackle climate change and improve energy security. Our Scotland editor James Cook looks at how it would work.
Does a solution to the climate crisis lie here in the Highlands? This is where SSE wants to build a giant dam and 2 reservoirs. On days when power from wind farms is plentiful, water would be pumped uphill and stored for release to generate energy by spinning turbines on still days when it's scarce.
Well, we've flown in here to this remote and stunning spot. This is Corrie Glass. This is where the hydro scheme is going to be located. The dam will be built down there. And feast your eyes, because when it's all finished, where I'm standing right here now will be about 90 metres underwater.
By tunnels and pipes, the water is sent down to the power station.
It's 80 years since the UK government took charge of hydro in Scotland, building dozens of giant dams. They brought power, jobs and tourism to the Glens. Now, say the private power companies, it's time for a new generation of hydro.
I think across the Highlands of Scotland, we've shown that hydro can become a critical part of the landscape, and I'm convinced that Corrie Glass would be the same for generations to come.
Is it definitely going to happen?
It's viable from an engineering perspective and from an economic perspective, but obviously a number of things have to fall into place. SSE will need clarity around how the UK government is going to support projects like Corrie Glass.
A review of energy policy is underway. Ministers say they're committed to supporting hydro.
Using water to generate power is an age-old idea, but in many ways it's never been more relevant. Hydro can help the world tackle climate change by moving away from oil and gas, and it can help the UK reduce its reliance on importing energy from abroad.
We need a lot more energy storage capability. Probably sort of 10 to 50 times greater, even than the capacity of Corrie Glass, to be able to move energy between the seasons, of using all of that kind of spare wind and solar power from the summer and make use of it in the winter.
But with the United Nations warning that humanity is on thin ice because of climate change, there may be some hope in the Highlands. James Cook, BBC News, Corrie Glass in the Great Glen.
The man accused of murdering Olivia Pratt-Corbell has given evidence in the case at Manchester Crown Court for the first time. Thomas Cashman denies murdering the 9-year-old at her home in Liverpool last August. Our North of England correspondent Judith Moritz has been following the trial and joins us now. Judith.
Yes, and today marked the end of the prosecution case against Thomas Cashman and the start of his defence. And so he moved from the glass wall dock inside courtroom number 1 over to the witness box to give evidence and to be questioned by his own barrister, John Cooper Casey. Now, they began by talking about his background, and we learned that Thomas Cashman had left school at the age of 13 or 14, become a drugs dealer. He said that he was a high-level cannabis dealer, selling the drug by the kilo and making up to £5,000 a week. Now, it's the prosecution case that he shot 9-year-old Olivia by mistake whilst he was in the process of trying to kill another drugs dealer, Joe Joseph Nee, and Thomas Cashman was asked whether he knew Joseph Nee. He said he did. He'd known him for more than 10 years. He didn't have a problem with him, he said, and he denied making preparations for the shooting by tracking his whereabouts. He said he didn't know the family of Olivia Pratt-Corbell, and he denies all 5 of the charges he faces. We expect Thomas Cashman to be back in the witness box tomorrow and to be asked about his movements on the day of the shooting.
Judith, thank you. A new report suggests the introduction of minimum pricing for alcohol in Scotland is reducing the number of deaths due to drinking. In 2018, Scotland became the first country in the world to begin charging a minimum price of 50 pence per unit of alcohol. The study, published in The Lancet, estimates more than 150 lives a year have been saved because of it. The family of a head teacher who took her own life after her school was downgraded from outstanding to inadequate after an Ofsted inspection have demanded changes to the system. Ruth Perry's family say she was under intolerable pressure. Ofsted says it deeply regrets what it called the head teacher's tragic death, but says the system helps to improve standards. Our education editor, Bramwyn Jeffries, is with me now. Will this change anything for Ofsted, for school inspections?
Well, Sophie, there's always been debate about how Ofsted does its job and the pressures that creates within schools. But today really has felt like a moment to pause and reflect. The death of Ruth Perry through suicide, a head teacher of a small primary school, like thousands of others across England, has focused minds on one question: is it right to judge a school by one single grade? Her school was downgraded despite in many ways offering a good education. And that has happened to other schools, leading some backbench Conservative MPs to question whether Ofsted's current approach is right. So what might change? Nothing immediately, despite the union's call for a pause. However, although the current government is very committed to the current system, says it's hugely important to parents, the Labour Party has said that it would prefer to move away from that single grade system to a report card for schools.
Bramwyn, thank you. Now, the Hollywood actress Gwyneth Paltrow has appeared in court in America. She's facing a lawsuit from a man who claims she crashed into him in a skiing accident in 2016. Terry Sanderson, who's 76, alleges he was hit from behind by the star and suffered a head injury and broken ribs. The actress claims it was Mr. Sanderson who was at fault. Our Los Angeles correspondent Sophie Long reports.
Used to appearing on the red carpets of Hollywood and the silver screen, today Gwyneth Paltrow appeared in court as the defendant. She's being sued over a skiing accident on the slopes of Deer Valley, accused of a human hit and run.
This is the case of Terry Sanderson versus Gwyneth Paltrow, case number 190500048. Beginning trial here today. Would you please swear in the jurors? If you could please stand and raise your right hand.
Retired optometrist Terry Sanderson, who's 76, claims Miss Paltrow was skiing out of control and hit him from behind, knocking him out, causing a brain injury, before skiing off and leaving him injured in the snow. Miss Paltrow, though, says he hit her before apologising and telling her he was fine.
The court heard that Gwyneth Paltrow considered herself to be an intermediate skier, but Mr. Sanderson's lawyer said that she had hired multiple instructors and had hit him hard, causing his body to smash into the ground, breaking 4 of his ribs and giving him a concussion. Said that she then bolted down the mountain without saying anything.
The court was told that for a year following the incident, Mr. Sanderson had displayed symptoms of a persistent brain injury and would encounter problems for the rest of his life. The case continues. Sophie Long, BBC News, Los Angeles.
Now, for the first time, lights celebrating the holy month of Ramadan have just been switched on in central London. Muslims in the UK and around the world celebrate Ramadan, marking the month that the Quran was first revealed to the Prophet Muhammad. The holy month begins over the next couple of days, and during that time, practicing Muslims won't eat between sunset and sunrise. And we're finished tonight with sporting comings and goings. The Olympic gold medalist Maddie Hinch has announced that she is retiring from hockey. The goalkeeper saved all 4 penalties in the 2016 Olympic final shootout to lead Team GB to their first women's hockey gold. Also leaving her sport is Sarah Hunter, captain of England's rugby team. She'll retire after the opening women's Six Nations match against Scotland on Saturday. The back row forward is England's most capped player, male or female. But someone who's not retiring is Roy Hodgson. Crystal Palace have reappointed the 75-year-old as their manager after sacking Patrick Vieira. It means he'll extend his record as the oldest manager in Premier League history. Time for a look at the weather now. Chris Fawkes is here. Hi, Chris.
Hi, Sophie. Well, it's been another unsettled day today, but rather than the really persistent rain, we actually had some brighter skies. It was a day of sunny spells and passing shower clouds like these. But those rainfall totals have been topping up, and there are quite a few places now that have seen over 1.5 times the March average rainfall. And we do have more rain still around the corner. On the satellite picture, the next batch of rain is just starting to work into western areas at the moment, but the Atlantic is full of shower clouds, so we are going to see further downpours over the coming days. Overnight tonight, the rain spreads from Northern Ireland across Scotland, England and Wales. All the while, it will get quite windy overnight with gusty southwesterly winds setting in place. Still mild for most of us, but some slightly fresher air getting into Northern Ireland and Scotland as well. Now, tomorrow morning, it is going to be a windy morning, particularly for Scotland, where we've just got to squeeze in the isobars here, and that will generate some strong winds. We're talking about gusts potentially reaching around 75 miles an hour for a time across western Scotland before those winds ease later in the day. A band of rain clearing as well. Elsewhere, it will be quite a blustery kind of day, gusts of around 40 or 50 miles an hour. I suppose at least one of the benefits of those strong winds is the shower clouds get blown through pretty quickly and the sunshine comes out, so the downpours won't last too long. It's a similar story really on Thursday. Again, it's a showery kind of day. Those showers heavy, some of them thundery in nature, and we've still got those brisk southwesterly winds dragging up mild air. So temperatures for many still around 14 or 15 degrees, 11s and 12s for Scotland and for Northern Ireland. Now for Thursday night, we might see a bit of rain just skirting into eastern areas of England. It looks pretty wet in the west, and the outlook, well, further showers are expected. It might get a little bit colder as well for the far north of Scotland. Might see some wintry showers at the weekend.
Chris, thank you. And that's it from the BBC News at 6. It's time now on BBC One to join our teams across the nations and regions for the news where you are. Goodbye.
Sophie, thank you. Good evening. Racism, misogyny and homophobia at the heart of the Metropolitan Police Force. Tonight on BBC London, a special programme on what it means for Londoners and what needs to change. The review by Baroness Casey looked at the culture throughout the force and found that it needs a complete overhaul to restore the trust of Londoners. We'll have reaction from those in charge and from people across the capital.
I'm absolutely determined that we will fix this.
We need an external test as to whether we think it's cleaned itself up and the systems are in place.
My feelings are of sadness and anger, but not of shock.
And to say here we are, 40 years later, we're still saying that these things are happening, come on.
You know, you're hearing too many things about the police that, you know, they're supposed to protect and serve, are they?
I've got friends that want to join the police, you know, but because of the racism and all of it, it put them off.
Hello and welcome to the programme. Police officers jailed for rape, sexual assault and murder. Systemic racism, misogyny and homophobia. Women and children failed. Londoners put last. Today, the state of the Metropolitan Police Service was laid bare as the report into its culture and standards of behaviour was released. Baroness Casey was tasked with the review after Sarah Everard was murdered by police officer Wayne Cousins. In her report, her stark warning was that the force could be broken up if it didn't change fast enough. The Met Commissioner has said he's heartbroken by the findings and has vowed to put things right. But where does this leave our police force and the Londoners they're supposed to protect, serve and represent? Our Home Affairs correspondent Sonia Jessup has the first of tonight's reports.
Sarah Everard's rape and murder by a serving officer shook trust in the Met Police. But now a new report lays bare how badly Londoners have been let down, finding institutional misogyny, racism, homophobia in a force that's been in denial for decades.
It's time for Londoners to have a better police service, and we've told everybody that they need it and want it, so things must change.
But will they? Outside New Scotland Yard today calls for a public inquiry over fears this may be another report that makes no difference.
What we don't want to do is to stand here in 5, 10, 15 years' time and have a repeat of the Scarman review, the Macpherson review.
I'm absolutely devastated. 25 years since giving evidence at the Macpherson inquiry into the death of Stephen Lawrence. And I'm saying the same thing I said then.
He's horrified too by the details in the review of the Met's toxic culture. Officers suffering abuse from colleagues.
That's happened in the 80s.